everyone, it's me. Welcome back to another video. In our last one, we discussed some iconic video game villains who could have been redeemed. But after your feedback, it's clear there are many more that should have received a redemption arc but never got one. So today, I'll be going over 5 more. The first villain we're going to talk about comes from Grand Theft Auto 3, which is the hilariously named Woozie. No, seriously, that's how it's spelled. Why? I don't know. Rockstar probably thought it was funny to have a large man with a ridiculous name run around the city shooting people, but I think they could have done so much more with him. You see, Woozie isn't just an unstoppable killing machine. He's actually quite cowardly and doesn't want to get hurt. In fact, he flees the second the player approaches him in the first mission he's in. He then spends the rest of the game running away from the player, hiding behind his goons and only fighting when he has the upper hand. Honestly, I feel like they could have played this up way more. Imagine if, instead of being a lackey for the Syndico family, Woozie was once a powerful hitman who had to flee the mafia because he had become too afraid to do the job. Maybe he lost his nerve after accidentally killing an innocent person or something like that, and now he runs around the city trying to hide from them, working as a bouncer to keep out of sight. Then, when the protagonist of GTA 3 enters the picture, Woozie sees an opportunity to take down the mafia by making a deal with them. He tells them he'll work for them, but he'll also give them information about his old bosses, hoping they'll kill each other. But as the game goes on, the protagonist starts to see through Woozie and realizes he's nothing but a coward. So at the end, he has to choose whether to turn Woozie into the mafia or spare him. This would have made Woozie so much more than just a big oaf with a ridiculous name. It would have given him depth. It would have made him sympathetic and maybe even likable. And it could have made for some truly memorable scenes. Our next iconic villain comes from yet another Grand Theft Auto game. This time it's Grand Theft Auto, Vice City. And unlike Woozie, this villain definitely does not need a name explained. It's of course, the maniacal drug lord himself, Ricardo Murtha Montana. When the player first meets Montana, he's already begun his descent into madness. He's paranoid, he's unpredictable, and he's completely ruthless. He's also shown to be incredibly intelligent, able to manipulate those around him into doing his bidding. Even Tommy Vercetti himself was under Montana's control for a good portion of the game. But as the game progressed, Montana's mental state deteriorated until he became, well, completely insane. If the game had ended with Montana's supposed death, he would have gone down in history as one of the greatest villains in video game history. However, we soon find out in Grand Theft Auto, Vice City stories that he faked his own death and went into hiding. Now, while this was a pretty good plot twist, it took away from what made Montana such a great character in the first place. His unpredictability and ruthlessness were what made him so intimidating and interesting. But once we learned he survived, both of those things kind of went out the window. I mean, why didn't he just disappear and start a new life somewhere? Why come back to Vice City and start causing trouble again? The answer is pretty simple. Actually, Montana had unfinished business. He may have faked his own death and gone into hiding, but he still wanted to rule Vice City, and he still wanted revenge on those who betrayed him. He came back to Vice City to take back what was once his and to make those who wronged him pay. So if the game had ended with Montana actually being dead, he could have gone down in history as one of the greatest villains in video game history. But since it didn't, we're left with a somewhat diminished version of a character that could have been so much more. Our next iconic villain comes from the equally iconic Legend of Zelda, Majora's Mask. It's of course, the Skull Kid. But wait, hold on. The Skull Kid isn't Majora's Mask. The Skull Kid is just possessed by Majora's Mask. Well yes, this is true, but I believe that the Skull Kid's actions while possessed are a reflection of his true self. Think about it. If the Skull Kid was a completely innocent and pure-hearted individual, he wouldn't have been susceptible to the mask's influence in the first place. The Skull Kid was already troubled before the events of the game, as seen in the Romani Ranch, where he was hanging out with some friends, scaring off customers and causing general mayhem. The Skull Kid was already heading down a dark path, and all Majora's Mask did was accelerate that. So if Majora's Mask hadn't possessed him, I believe the Skull Kid would have eventually turned to darkness anyway. And what's more, I think he would have been redeemed had Link not intervened. Think about it. Majora's Mask was attracted to the Skull Kid because of his sadness and loneliness. The Skull Kid was already a troubled individual before the events of the game, and all Majora's Mask did was accelerate that. So if Majora's Mask hadn't possessed him, I believe the Skull Kid would have eventually turned to darkness anyway. And what's more, I think he would have been redeemed had Link not intervened. Imagine if, instead of fighting Link, the Skull Kid had attacked him. After demasking, the Skull Kid would have been confronted by his friends and realized the error of his ways. Then Link would have helped him to move past his sadness and loneliness, and the two would have become friends. This would have been a much more compelling story than the one we got, and it would have made the Skull Kid a much more iconic villain. Our next villain comes from the critically acclaimed game, Red Dead Redemption 2. It's, of course, Micah Bell, the most hated man in video game history. Okay, maybe that's a slight exaggeration, but come on. How much do we all hate Micah Bell? The thing about Micah is that from the moment he's introduced, he's shown to be a bad guy. He's a liar, a cheat, a thief, and a killer. And to top it all off, he's also a racist. He's everything that Dutch and the gang aren't supposed to be, and he represents everything that's wrong with the world at the time. He's the embodiment of greed, selfishness, and hatred. And he's the reason that the gang eventually breaks apart. But let's be honest here. We all knew Micah was gonna get his comeuppance. The real question is, what if he didn't? What if, instead of being killed by the player, Micah managed to escape? I believe that this would have made for a much more interesting story, personally. Imagine if, after the events of the game, Micah went into hiding, living the rest of his life as a wanted man. He would have been forced to live in poverty, always looking over his shoulder, never knowing when the law was going to catch up to him. This would have made him even more miserable than he already was, and it would have been a much more fitting punishment for him. Plus, it would have left the ending of the game much more open-ended and ambiguous. And finally, we have one of the most popular characters in gaming history, Sephiroth from Final Fantasy VII. There's no denying that Sephiroth is an iconic villain. He's charismatic, he's mysterious, and he's incredibly powerful. But I believe that he didn't need to be a villain. In fact, I think he could have easily been a hero. Think about it. Sephiroth was originally created as a soldier, an elite class of warriors designed to protect the planet. He was created to be a hero, but he turned out to be a villain. Why? Because he learned the truth about his origins. Sephiroth was created in a lab, experimented on, and used as a weapon. He wasn't born naturally like Cloud Strife or Tifa Lockhart, and when he learned this, he snapped. He went on a rampage, killing dozens of soldiers and maiming even more. And this is where the game could have taken a different turn. Instead of turning against the planet, Sephiroth could have turned on Shinra Electric Power Company, the organization that created him and used him as a weapon. He could have led a rebellion against them, fighting to overthrow the company and bring about a new era of peace and prosperity for the planet. And I believe that this is exactly what Sephiroth wanted. He wanted to bring about change, but he went about it in the wrong way. Sephiroth is a tragic figure. He's a victim of circumstance, a pawn in a much larger game. And in the end, he pays the ultimate price for it. So what if, instead of being defeated by Cloud and the gang, Sephiroth had won? What if Shinra had fallen and a new era of peace and prosperity had begun? Could Sephiroth have become a hero in the end? It might seem crazy, but I think it's entirely possible. Well, that's all I have for this video. Who are some iconic video game villains you think could have been redeemed? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching.